Good morning, everyone. Welcome to our seminar today titled Preparing Your Building for Civil Unrest. My name is Bob Spratt. I'm the chair of the St. Paul Boma Security Steering Committee. I'd like to thank all of you for taking the time on your schedule today to participate in our seminar. Civil unrest is a subject that concerns all of us. It's especially concerning to commercial property owners since these buildings are frequently targets of unrest. The Twin Cities has experienced many incidents of rioting over the past 4 months, and it's possible it will continue in the future. Our hope today is that if you do not have a plan in place already regarding civil unrest, that you may get some information that is useful to the development of that plan, and or is perhaps hear some new information from our seminar here today that could expand on an existing plan. With us today is Michael Rozin. Many of you know Michael. Michael founded Rozin Security, which is an internationally recognized security consulting firm. His team recently conducted a security study of downtown St. Paul, which has resulted in the Fusion Center initiative. Michael is here to talk about a potential civil unrest in the Twin Cities and what you should know to be doing to prepare. Before we get started, the seminar is scheduled for 1 hour. You can ask questions of Michael during the seminar. To type a question, click on the Q&A icon. If you want to speak, click on raise your hand and you'll be unmuted so that you can ask a question. So let's get started. Michael, welcome and thank you for conducting the seminar. I'll turn it over to you and we can get started.
Great. Okay, good morning, everyone. Can you hear me and hopefully see me? Can you hear me and see me okay? Just to confirm?
Yes.
Okay, great, thank you. Excellent. Again, thank you very much for joining, and thank you Boma for Joe and Bob for hosting this webinar. I think it's great to see that our community has taken proactive steps to prepare for potential another wave of civil unrest. And so the goal of this 1 hour is to give you, I won't talk about myself anymore here, I think you heard enough about me. The goal of this webinar is to kind of go over potential threat models of what could transpire during the elections week, potential implications, security implications as a result of what transpires, discuss some risk management strategies and best practices, right, for addressing what could transpire, designing a security plan, what it should look like, as well as addressing the topic of emergency preparedness for the civil unrest. Hopefully this is going to be useful for you. And as mentioned earlier, feel free to submit your questions, feel free to raise your hand. We'll make this interactive and I'll try to answer as many questions as I can as we go through. But with that in mind, I will jump through. Again, I think most of you know I have this Israeli background and my English is still not good, an accent is thick. So again, feel free to throw a question if there's something that you would like me to clarify, slow down, or anything at all, or translate what I said, I'll be happy to do so. Okay, so I'll jump in. We're going to start with the idea of election outcomes and the security implications as a result of those outcomes. The way we look at the upcoming elections, there are 3 possible scenarios. Scenario number 1, on November 3rd, we have a decisive Biden victory, or scenario number 2, on November 3rd, we have a decisive Trump victory. And scenario number 3, on November 3rd, we do not have a result. We do not have a result because of a number of reasons. Reason number 1, because there might be a situation where many more votes need to be counted due to mail-in ballots. Significant uptick in those mail-in ballots this year due to COVID-19. Or simply the results are announced but are contested by either candidate. And you see this scenario is highlighted in red. It's because it's intentional, and I will dive into what this means to us. But this scenario is of most concern from a security standpoint to us. Um, so let's kind of explore this a little further, right? There are additional contributing factors for these elections that distinguish these elections from just about any other elections in recent history. There has always been polarizations, and elections are traditionally known to attract, protests, to attract, movements, and that's all legitimate and it's all great. This year is different than many other years from a security standpoint, from a threat standpoint. I think it's important to acknowledge the differences because they are significant. The overall level of national divisiveness and polarization in 2020 is unprecedented. The country is truly divided, and there's significantly more extremes in its divisiveness, which is just a dangerous, dangerous from a security standpoint place to be. The death of George Floyd certainly happened right here in Minneapolis, and we have seen end of May, June, we have seen the outcome of the riots and civil unrest as a result of the incident. The emotions, right, and the movement that started as a result of George Floyd's death, right, is still alive. And elections, right, are going to add another energy to this movement. The COVID-19 pandemic, right, we cannot ignore that we are all in this, we're living through a pandemic. And we know that we already see the examples of pandemic causing significant challenge for people's mental health, for people's well-being. And it creates a lot of stressors on day-to-day life, economic and other relationship-like stressors. And those stressors, right, is another important factor here that could play out as a result of the energy associated with the elections. The recent death of the Supreme Court Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg and associated political movement and the energy around that, right, is only going to grow between now and the elections as the confirmations of Amy Barrett are going to take place. And then there's crime, right? We're going to talk a little bit about crime, and I'll outline that because it also has significant implications to all of you. But there is a truly unprecedented spike in crime in Twin Cities, right? We every year, right? So some years we have things go down, some things go up. This year, and certainly since the death of George Floyd, the crime spike in particularly in Minneapolis and also in St. Paul, not to that extent, but it's certainly going up. So let's kind of outline those scenarios, right, and the security implications of what that means if each one scenarios materialize. Note that this is nothing more than intelligence-based prediction that me and my team have analyzed and put together. No one, of course, knows how things are exactly going to pan out, but this, I think, is a safe guess of what could transpire. Scenario number one is a decisive Biden victory. On November 3rd, the results are announced, and Joe Biden is confirmed as the winner of the election. In that scenario, right, there are two kind of trigger points that could spiral the events that we could see. Trigger point number one would be Donald Trump, that President Donald Trump could certainly add the rhetorics and argue that the elections were, there were fraud. There's fraud involved. The results are not real results for whatever the reasons are. And that kind of rhetoric, right, could ignite the outright extremist groups, right, that have already said that they will be willing to take an action. And specifically, the groups that we're talking about is organizations like groups like Boogaloo Boys, which you have seen their presence over the summer, the Three Years, right, the Proud Boys, and several others that are according at least to Southern Poverty Law Center, they are classified as a hate groups. In Twin Cities in Minnesota, right, we have 5 of those groups that are known to operate and be present here. If that happens, right, if the rhetoric from Donald Trump and the right side is that Biden's victory was not real, it was fraudulent. That could ignite those kind of ultra-right that they call it the patriot, like anti-government groups. Now, if that happens, they could seize an opportunity to enact. They would look at it as opportunity to enact their own version of U.S. of the government, and that's kind of one of the goals that those organizations share. In this case, right, the targets, right, their targets will be both government establishments and government officials, as well as companies and corporations that openly pledge significant support for the DFL and for Joe Biden. And so those organizations, executives, corporations would be a legitimate target for organizations like this. Now, the concern, of course, is that the right-wing anti-government groups, right, what we know from their operational capability is that for most part, they are well-armed, and you know, it's a very different profile from kind of the radical left extremist groups, right? They are significantly more armed, significantly more organized, and potentially significantly more dangerous if they were to take up to violence. So that's scenario number one. Scenario number two is decisive Trump victory. If that was to transpire, right, on November 3rd, that result is announced that Donald Trump won the elections decisively. The likely, if that happens, the protest here is not going to come. It's not going to be triggered necessarily by Joe Biden. It's going to be more triggered by the left extreme organizations, right? That's where we can see same type of actors that are involved during the George Floyd protest could resurface and likely will resurface again. We're talking, of course, about Antifa. We're talking about many others, right, that align with that, with kind of this ultra left extreme thinking, and the type of things that we will see is we're likely going to see a significant amount of protests. And as we have experienced in the summer, right, when there's a large protest, it's a lot of energy. The anarchists are getting in the mix with those large protests. And our anarchists are the ones that typically starting the riots. And the riots is followed by looting and violence and more. And so that is, you know, if that scenario plays out, it's very likely that we'll see in Twin Cities large protests. And on the back of those legitimate protests, we could see riots unfolding and looting unfolding. So that is a scenario number two. Now, while those scenarios don't seem particularly happy, I think they are a lot less dangerous than the scenario number three. Scenario number three is, you know, from a security standpoint, is the most concerning scenario, where the election results are delayed and or contested. And the concern is that the duration of time, right, that it's going to take for the election results to be announced, whether it's because the ballots needs to be counted or because the case needs to be brought up all the way to the Supreme Court, whatever the outcome of that, the duration of time until the results are announced is going to be highly turbulent and likely violent, because it creates a situation where it allows both the far right extreme groups and the far left extreme groups to clash, and not only attack the same targets that I discussed, but also attack each other, and that could be very, 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 very dangerous for this country, and certainly dangerous to us in Twin Cities. So that is the kind of the scenario number three, and that is ultimately the worst case scenario, I think. And we have already seen, right, significant preparations, I think, on both sides. For our analyst team is actively looking around, and we have seen preparations on both sides, left and right, for this possible situation. And you know, on top of that, right, it's kind of overlaying the crime, right? As I mentioned earlier, you know, the crime in Twin Cities has spiked, and after the death of George Floyd. St. Paul specifically, right, 144 people have been shot in 2020. 23 homicides. It's a 52% increase compared to the same time in 2019. Close to 1,500 shots fired, over close to 240% increase in the amount of shots fired in the city. Overall, nationwide and even locally, right, the criminal elements, they seize the current anti-police rhetoric and narrative to seize this moment and self-profit. Assaults and robberies, carjackings have increased, and overall criminals are more, they're emboldened and they're looking for easier targets throughout this. Now, overlaying this with the elections, right, and the protests and the chaos, right, it's a safe bet that the crime elements will be out there and looking for opportunities, as they have been ever since George Floyd, but just more so because there'll be a lot more of it during the time. So specific risks to commercial real estate. We're talking about rioting, we're talking about looting, arson, vandalism, violence that could materialize in many sorts. A lot of cocktails we've seen being deployed, improvised explosive devices. There's a specific concern when it comes to attacks on emergency, first responders, emergency services. During that time, right, it's important to know that it's very likely that police, EMS, fire, they could be very much, not only they could be tapped with amount of incidents they have to handle, they also could themselves find to be the center point as a target, which, and what it means to you, right, is that potentially during that week and time that the availability of first responders and emergency services would not be the same as it is today, and you have to prepare for it. We have seen information leading us to believe that there's a potential for attacks being carried out on communication infrastructure. The fiber optic cables, the cell towers, is a way to create form of anarchy and disrupt communications, right? We have to prepare for potential situation for a short amount of time. If things escalate, we might lose the typical communications we rely on, right, our cell phones. Cyber attacks are likely to increase, coming from both sides, left and right, targeting the targets that they seem legitimate targets as on opposing camps. And then also reputational attacks, right, for organizations, businesses, tenants of yours that have explicitly support one political party or the other. There is a valid concern for attacks being staged to extract sensitive information to or just simply fake information out there in such a way that it shows that potentially one of your tenants, right, is being directly involved in falsifying the results of the elections, or paying some anarchists to do X, Y, and Z things. The idea is to carry both attacks on the validity of the elections as well as attacks on the reputation of certain company or entity. So that is something that we also have to consider. Now, with that, right, I'll start switching to what we need to do between now and then ultimately open for questions. But we have to approach it based on risk, right? It's impossible for us to be prepared and to tackle every single possible scenario here and have enough measures to ultimately protect yourself from every single possible outcome, right? It's just impossible, right? There's no such thing as a 100% security. But you have to start internally with a conversation of what risk, first and foremost, is acceptable to you. What risk, is damage outside of your buildings, is damage to your lobbies, potentially, is a fire here, a fire there, is what is acceptable? What is the level, what is the type of risk that you are okay knowing that it could happen, and you have insurance provider, or you have other backup strategy to deal with that, you're okay with it. There are other risks that you will say that it's simply unacceptable, something that you cannot live with, and something that is going to be cost prohibitive or reputation prohibitive or business prohibitive for you to accept. And for that standpoint, right, when you define risks that you cannot accept, you have to plan for those risks right now. And the plan has to start with the thinking of, is there a way for me to mitigate it, right? And I'll talk about the mitigation strategies here momentarily. Is there a way I can transfer this risk, right, to someone else? Can I avoid it in its entirety? Maybe I can close the operations of my buildings for the duration of the elections week or the days after. That helps me avoid the type of risk that I'm not comfortable handling. For example, damage to your tenants, to the people themselves in your buildings. And so that conversation, I think the risk strategy that you're going to follow needs to happen very, very soon, I think, and you have to be very clear on what is acceptable risk to you and what is not. And the risk that is not acceptable, you have to prepare for it and act on it right now. There's a couple of quotes here before I jump to the specifics of what and how we should be thinking. Is the hope is not a good security strategy. It never has been. And so making a plan, right, and making a plan that it's feasible, that you can act on right now. It's just absolutely critical for you, so you don't find yourself in the last minute, right, with those scenarios materializing in front of your eyes, and you haven't thought through your strategy and have to make a plan right then and there. That would be probably the worst case scenario for your business. The other quote for Sun Tzu, right? Maybe you heard this quote before, right? Is that a strategy without tactics is the slowest route to victory, right? And tactics without strategy is just a noise before you're losing it. So you need both. You need effective strategy, risk strategy, and you need specific tactical measures in place, right, to be successful in acting the strategy. So let's talk about those tactical measures, right? Generally speaking, right, there are 4 key elements of every security plan that you have to consider. And specifically for this civil unrest, upcoming civil unrest. One is information, access to real-time information that you can rely on, information that is accurate, information that can make you and the decision makers in the organization and your clients, tenants, being aware of facts on the ground. Access to information is I cannot emphasize, and we've been very involved during the civil unrest here ever since George Floyd, not only in Twin Cities, but actually throughout the country. This one piece, the information, is so critical. So we'll talk about what does it mean from a tactical standpoint. Operational security, right? Having effective security personnel and good people who can make good decisions, establishing critical procedures and protocols now ahead of time is essential. Technology that can assist you and support you, and some physical measures that could be invaluable, right? If you act on them right now and you have them in place before bad things start transpiring. So when it comes to information, right, you creating a situation in which you have the ability to have access to real-time information and know all protests and large gatherings that are going to transpire during this time. It's absolutely critical. I would suggest, whatever is, whether you have your analysts, whether you partner with, you rely on local law enforcement or a state fusion center, or you contract a company that can provide this for you. You should certainly invest in it and have a plan of how you're going to be providing, how you're going to get a real-time information. Even now, before the elections, which I think it's highly recommended for you to have access and know all the likely gatherings and events that could transpire, because knowing that could help guide your decisions, what you're going to be doing with the building. So it's important that you're staying informed. It's also important to inform your building occupants, your tenants, your employees, right? They need to know, and they need to, to the extent, help them make their own decisions, but just to inform them that it's near your building and here's the potential risks. I think it's critical. If you do know of known protests, right, it's important to plan pedestrian and vehicle routes that can help your tenants and yourself avoid the potentially affected areas. And that should be communicated ahead of time, knowing that something's going to happen, 2 blocks north of you, right? You can expect that X number of streets likely going to be busy and things could transpire there. You want to think about other access points and provide the communication ahead of time. As I mentioned, right, whatever the way for you to do it, right, whether it's relying on local law enforcement, dedicated analysts on duty that you could hire or you contract, or I think access to real-time information is absolutely important here. When it comes to security plan, right, the security plan has to adhere to those 4 objectives, right? The objective of deterring deterring threat actors, making your buildings not a desirable target, have to detect the evolving threat early enough in advance, having the ability to prevent the threat actors from being successful, and having the ability to respond. So, here's some suggestions, right, that you can act on right now. Do a self-assessment of your exteriors in preparation for the elections week, and remove any unsecure objects at the exterior of the building that could be used as projectiles or barricades. Assess the exposure of your critical infrastructure that is exterior of your building, whether we're talking about transformers, we're talking about critical utility lines, data lines, see how those are secured. And if they're not, that's a good time to add on a layer of protective measures around them. So it's not appear easy to damage your critical infrastructure. Again, you could become a target if not only because protests and riots happen to happen in a near proximity, but also potentially because of your tenants that have open support and the high involvement with one or the other political camp here that could make them legitimate targets for the other side, of course. Secure dumpsters. Remove if they are anywhere in the vicinity or they're open access. Remove external garbage receptacles during that week for sure. Garbage receptacles create a great concealment area for a variety of devices, and so just removing that for the week is going to be beneficial. Parking rims. Really take a look at your parking plan. The recommendation is to have those parking rims secure. And if you have some unsecured vehicles that are commonly parked, your building vehicles are commonly parked outside the building or in like a loading dock areas that can be easily accessible, those vehicles should be removed because they not only damage to the vehicles, but the vehicles themselves, right, could be an opportunity to cause harm to the rest of the building if they, for example, explode and start burning. Right. Additional physical measures. Just generally take a look at your perimeter of your building, and identify weak points and that you might want to harden. Right. Windows. If you have a glass, and I assume most of you have glass, you probably have seen in Minneapolis, right, the trends on Nicollet Avenue and other buildings proactively to start covering their windows, right, ahead of non-scheduled events that could be now quite contentious. So, election certainly is one of them. Consider covering your windows. Consider also potentially if you don't have protective material for your windows and your glazing, it's a good time to take a look at security films, other materials that can be put on outside the windows that can protect your windows from easily being crushed, damaged, and used as an access point to your facility. Take a look at your access points. Look at your doors, all the access points, and have a plan how you're going to control them and how you're going to harden them. You still have to use them for the duration of the week and beyond, but they have to be controlled and they have to be hardened. If you have some assets inside your buildings and your tenants have some assets inside your buildings, that the loss of those assets is just it's too high from a risk standpoint, you might want to remove those assets from the building to a more remote location. High visibility of quality security personnel, right, is important, right? When it comes to the most common threat actor, the looters, the criminal threat elements, they're looking for easy opportunity, right? To easy opportunities, they are not necessarily looking for confrontation with authorities or security personnel. They're just looking for opportunities to come in, steal, destroy, and walk away with something they can use. So, to the extent possible, right, and within your budget, probably plan for extra visibility and extra presence of security personnel that could provide that necessary deterrence. Most of the bad things that we know are generally happening after dark, right? That's when bad things really start transpiring. And so look at the calendar, and knowing that the dark is happening a little sooner, you might want to think about a plan where your tenants, employees, occupants of the buildings are just not present in the dark, meaning you finish earlier, and building is closed earlier during that week. Think about political stickers. So if your building, for example, as a building, you wanted to put some political stickers, it's all good, right? Right now, it's all good. Your employees, I'm sure, tenants, they all, many of them, I'm sure, drive their cars and with political stickers, which is absolutely good. But just know that during that week, right, specifically that week, when the tension is going to be so high and there's a high likelihood for bad things to transpire, take a look at the signs that appear in the perimeter of your building. And it might be a good idea to inform your tenants and employees of associated risk to their personal property, to their vehicles, to themselves, because of the political stickers, regardless of whatever the camp, whatever political camp the sticker belongs to, because there will be opposition, right, as a result of the results of the elections we outlined earlier. And seeing the stickers and the signs will make their vehicles, their property, and themselves potentially legitimate targets during those very turbulent several days that could transpire. And when it comes to days, right, again, the time frame that we have in mind is for scenario number 3, which is the most concerning one. Could be potentially up to a week to 10 days until if the results of the elections needs to go to a Supreme Court, needs to be recounted, needs to be counted, whatever the situation might be. It could be week to 10 days. Those are the days that is very likely for us to experience violence in the city. When it comes to detection, right, you want to have the ability to recognize evolving threats quickly. Think, this is, I know the fusion center is being developed as we speak, and it's still not quite functional. But nevertheless, think about maybe organizing yourself a little bit with information sharing. For sharing in the form of, at a minimum, right? I don't know if it currently exists, but consider getting something like maybe property managers get on the same WhatsApp group or a Slack group or something else, right? Really easy like that. That maybe create some groups for security personnel that's working around the buildings, create some groups for property managers, and make sure the information starts flowing, right? Because there's a power in numbers here. And the more of and can share information in real time, because you see something from your cameras, you see something from one of your tenants who reports you, whatever it may be. Sharing this in real time could be really, really detrimental for the success and the risk management strategy here. If you can have a dedicated analyst, right, kind of working with you and informing you of everything that's transpiring during that time, I think it's very, very beneficial. If you can, to extent you can, share radio communications between security personnel and building management, that could also be great. Sharing incidents, right? Having some sort of database, internal database, where you can see what has transpired, what are the threat actors. That information should be easily accessible to security personnel, property management personnel. So if this person is associated with extremist group, and just yesterday it's likely that's the description of the person who caused damage to the building, and today that person, you see it in your building, you probably want to take an action, but you're not going to know it unless you have a central platform for sharing threat information. So something to think about and act on now. Surveillance capability. Right, there are some easy ways, right? I know the Fusion Center is going to do it, and will be able to provide that very much necessary service for you. But there are other easy ways to do it. For example, in Minneapolis, the Downtown Improvement District, right? There's a platform now that's being widely used, Fuses, and Fuses provides that capability where you can easily integrate. It's just exterior cameras. You can tap into city cameras. It's really not complicated. The integration can happen really quick. And so I suggest maybe taking a look at that, taking a look at this company. I'll be happy to connect you with the right people if you would like to during the questions. But sharing external cameras and your buildings having the ability to see what's happening in between the streets and the periphery of the streets it's critical. It's really critical, especially when incidents could become volatile so quick. You know, from a prevention standpoint, right? You want to think about, you know, again, like having materials on your doors and windows that can prevent access to your facilities. Think about concrete barriers and other vehicle calming features, specifically when it comes to your main entry points, right? And any other parts of your building that are accessible and vulnerable to a vehicle intrusion. We have seen vehicles have been used now way too much and too often to ram into protesters, to ram into people, to ram into buildings. And you know, this is the kind of scenario you don't want to see. So you know, if you have your main entrance right on this intersection, and there's a direct vehicle path, you know, it might be a good idea to rent a concrete barrier to just for that week and put it in and around your vulnerable points, so the vehicles, you know, won't be able to drive in your building, and you're also protecting the people, of course, in your lobbies. Think about internal segmentation. Again, if you say, you know, if my lobby gets accessed and breached and there's an incident there, I can deal with that. We have fire system, we have, you know, there's going to be some damage, but insurance is going to cover most of it, and it's likely going to be fine. But if they get to one of my tenant spaces, right, there is going to be a very different risk for me, and I cannot tolerate that risk. And so you might want to think about what are internal segmentation, what internal controls you have inside your building that would prevent threat actors to getting further. Elevators that are controlled, stairs that are controlled, doors that separate each floor that are controlled, and so on. But think this through, right? Think through your internal segmentation and what are the internal vulnerabilities that exist within your building if your lobbies and common areas were to be breached. And again, effective security personnel can be a difference here between damage occurring and damage prevented. When it comes to response, right, the objective is to minimize the damage and recover as quick as possible when incidents do happen. Our typical objectives, right, of emergency response is life safety, stabilization of the scene, and property preservation. Now is the time. Now is the time for you to to think things through. And if you, I assume most of you have emergency management plans, emergency response plans in your building. I don't know how many of you have specific plans for civil unrest. And you know, that's the, you know, hopefully most of your plans are built as all hazards plans, so they allow you to function in a structured manner and manage incidents in a structured manner. But think through the civil unrest situation and if and when it impacts your building. You want to put together a plan. Doesn't have to be complicated. Doesn't have to be, you know, some big long book that has no meaning. It could be one page. A one-page effective plan will go a long way if you just sit down as a management team, think this through, and create a civil unrest emergency response plan for your property. It could pay dividends for a long time. Once you have this plan, train your staff, because a plan without training is just that. It's just a document that has no meaning, it has no operational validity to it. So train your personnel on the plan, and if you can, conduct several tabletop exercises, internal tabletop exercises, where you can create a scenario or two of, you know, we have a protest across the street, things escalate, we have a situation like that. And now, you know, how are you going to function, right? Who makes what decisions? What are the immediate priorities? Going through this motion right now and dry running it before you're in the week of elections would go a long way. During I have some anecdotal stories here. I have heard so many times that we during the civil unrest in Minneapolis and a couple other cities, some of our clients that we are supporting have said, right, at that point, they said, you know, I wish we had thought this through before, because that lack of coordination, the lack of ability to make the right decisions at the right time, created a situation where the damage got bigger and grew, and ultimately, you know, to some businesses, it became almost catastrophic. And so investing in civil unrest plan, emergency management plan, right now in the month of October is just the right thing to do, and I highly encourage you to do so. And then think about business continuity plan for your building. What does it mean if there is incident, right? If if there's a significant damage to your building, um, uh, what kind of services you'll be able to still provide, what services you cannot provide. Um, if there's a situation um, in which the part of the areas in which your building is located is simply inaccessible, right? And you cannot be there. Think about this continuity of operations for you and your tenants, and encourage them, right, to have a plan, right, that allows them to operate in case bad things happen. Today with the technology, I think just about anything is possible. And I'm sure COVID helped with that idea because most of us are working remotely, I think, in any case. But it's a good thing to have a business continuity plan if something happens to your physical buildings and assets right there, or the area is just unsafe to be. Develop contingent transportation routes, as I mentioned earlier. Have a plan, right, of what happens if the common typical avenues of access to your building are not available. How would you transport? Think about the curfew situations, right? If you and your staff, your personnel, will have to be in the buildings. You have maybe some mechanics, you have some security people that have to be in the buildings regardless of what happens. But curfew, things get bad in the streets, and curfew is enacted again. Curfew that maybe starts at 5 or 6 o'clock in the evening because things are so bad. And you have to have buildings. You need to have a plan. How will your employees, right, go to and from the building during the curfew? You need to have probably some sort of relationship with law enforcement entities that will allow your people to go to and from the building without getting in trouble. Now's the time to test, arson and fires. We have seen it in Minneapolis. We have seen it just about anywhere where riots unfold. Fires is very, very common, unfortunately. And so now's the time to make sure that your fire suppression, fire prevention systems, fire detection systems, smoke detectors, everything's working, everything's functioning, and you can use it when you need to be. So I wanted to leave here a little bit of time for Q&As and kind of just summarize this. The key points is sit down sooner than later this week, next week at the latest, and determine your risk strategy. What is acceptable risk? What is not to you? The risk that is unacceptable to you, you need to act on. You need to put measures in place to try to mitigate it now. Access to information and having ability to maintain a high level of situational awareness between now and specifically during the week of the elections is absolutely critical. Try to organize as partners, organize entities. Maybe BOMA can provide some support as well, but have the ability to share information and have access to real-time information. Know what are the planned protests and events that are supposed to take place. Each one of those protests during the week of the elections has the possibility of escalating and becoming something more. And there will be a lot of them. During the week of elections, we will see a lot of protests in Twin Cities. Create your security plan, right? Think about the information aspect. Think about the physical measures that we discussed. Think about leveraging technology, surveillance technology. Think about sharing your resources, and plan right now for your security operations, what it would look like during this week. And the last point is, as we just talked about, right? Create civil unrest emergency response plan. Make sure it's simple enough, and make sure it's trained to the people that will need to use it, and try it, right? At least in a dry format by tabletop exercising it. Try it. Make sure everyone will be able to act in when if worst happens. Also think about business continuity as we talked about, and you might want to again simply update the plans, what it means for you if the building becomes inaccessible, if it gets damaged. Your tenants have to be prepared and know that they will not be able to rely on this building for some time if that transpires. You also, I'm sure you are very in tune with your insurance companies, but it's always good to pay close attention, right, to your insurance clauses, because that could also guide your risk management strategy. The things that are not going to be covered, or that's going to be just impossible for you to act in, is a thing that you probably need to invest now to mitigate. So take a look at your insurance policies and what it means for you. Okay, I'll stop torturing you here with this bad English and terrible accent. I'll open here for questions if there are any questions and comments. Generally, again, I appreciate you being here. I appreciate you thinking ahead and being proactive. You know, it's a little dark areas we're going through, but I'm sure on the back end of it, things will get better and we'll be good again. 2020 will end and we'll be in a lot better era. So with that, I'll open for any questions.
Okay, we're just searching the chats, and anybody who has a question, please hit the raise your hand button. If you'd like to ask Michael a question, then you'll be unmuted. And
I have a few questions that popped up in the Q&A. I'll start with the first one. It says, Michael, do you have any intel of more aggressive TTPs of any of the VE groups? For example, VBIED or vehicle versus people attacks?
You know, the information that we have, right, from that standpoint, right, shows a potential, like in what we have seen just used over the last several months throughout the United States, is certainly firearms, vehicles being used as a weapon. We have seen explosive devices, and we have seen a lot of cocktails, right? That's the type of the common TTPs that we have come across.
Okay, thank you very much. I have another one here. It says, do you recommend turning lights on or off during overnight periods?
Good question. Yeah, I think from the rioting and looting standpoint, actually, the looters, right, the criminals, they're going after something that they know is going to be there or something that they can see, right? So, you know, if there is, you know, situation where there's assets, right? You have glass windows and there's assets that could be seen, right? I suggest that could be stolen, easily taken, ATM machines, whatever it may be. Those are the areas that you might want to dim your lights or make sure that the windows are covered so it's not easy to see those desirable assets that the crime elements are going after. Otherwise, actually, you know, keeping the lights on as a form of presence and showing that the building is occupied and it could not be an easy target, it's a good thing. But just do kind of the self-assessment and consider removing what appears to be an easy to grab. You know, typically they're going for valuable items, for money, right? ATM machines and such. You know, that's the kind of stuff that you want to make sure that if you cannot remove, you want to turn on the lights so they cannot be easily seen.
Okay, thank you very much. Another question is, what is the most common mistake made by buildings with this type of planning?
I probably have a laundry list of that. But the common mistake starts with the assumption that this cannot happen to me. That, you know, you're in St. Paul, you're not in Minneapolis, you're not on the main path, you're not next to something that is considered to be a large main gathering square. It cannot happen to me, and you kind of take it as a non-issue, right? You say it's gonna be okay, right? You know, those buildings over there, you know, the buildings that are 5-10 blocks away, they're the ones that are gonna get really the most of it. We're gonna be fine here. So that's one. Secondly, right, what I have seen is just complete, you know, kind of inadequacy of the security function when those things happen. When you know, I have seen, you know, security personnel, right, ultimately, right, not knowing what to do when criminal elements start sniffing around the building or trying to break into the building. They or simply we saw security personnel simply run away, right, because they got scared and they don't know how to deal with the situation, or they're not prepared to deal with the situation. I have also seen situations where where the buildings, right, have put their tenants. Like I have a specific example here in danger, right? There's this building that during the George Floyd area that has some residential and some commercial tenants, and it was 3 or 4 days after event starts unfolding, and suddenly there's all the indicators are that buildings in the general area will get affected. The building did not make the decision to make to make the call of stopping business or make the call of having their residents put some security measures in place, and the result was a pretty glaring problem that currently, right, this building has lost most of its tenants, as far as I know, both on the residence and the commercial side, because not only the fact the building got damaged, but there was a physical, their tenants got impacted, their residents got impacted directly, and a lot of that could have been avoided if with enough proactive thinking and communication to the occupants of this building. They simply, should have stepped away for a couple of days and returned back when the heat of the moment is gone. I think those kind of decisions were detrimental in this case.
Okay, I've got another question here. How effective are the films on windows to prevent breakage/access? Any minimum requirements to be beneficial?
Yeah, so when it comes to films, right, there are a number of products in the markets. 3M locally has the 8mm safety film. It's a really good product. There are a number of other products I'm happy to pass on. Separately, feel free to reach out to me. But when it comes to films themselves and their purpose, they are good at delaying access to your buildings, right? They by themselves are not gonna stop it ultimately. When a film is on your building, right, it's gonna take significantly longer, right, to break the glass. The glass is gonna shatter, it's gonna still stay in place. And it's gonna take someone, right, working this for quite a while, right? So, whether it's a hammer or other tool, 15, 20 minutes of breaking, and striking, eventually they'll be able to get in. Now, if during those 15, 20 minutes, that will allow police to respond if they are available, maybe that will help your security personnel to tackle this problem if you have such. You have to have another mechanism in place. Ultimately, the safety film is just a delay mechanism that's not completely going to stop people from getting in. There are other, when you couple it with other things like, covering your windows, it's another, it takes longer to break through the plywood, and then you have to deal with the windows, you buy more time. And, there's other products in the market that actually can be put in front of the glass that actually protect the glass from giving in. But just know that, security films specifically, their function is to delay rather than to completely prevent access to the glass.
Somebody asked, similar to a previous question, do you recommend keeping street level blinds closed for a building with a lot of perimeter windows?
Yes.
I have somebody who asked, Julie Petit, can we get a copy of your presentation? That would be really helpful.
Yeah, happy to do it. I will send it to Boma. I'll send it to Joe and Bob here, and they can disseminate it accordingly.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question that I think a lot of property managers may ask a question of is, what is the best practice in terms of evacuation during a civil unrest, and what does that look like?
Yeah. So ideally, right? Ideally, Bob, that's a good question. Ideally, right, you don't have to evacuate during civil unrest. If you find yourself needing to evacuate during civil unrest, right, something wrong has happened as is, because ideally you are aware, right, you're aware of the dangerous events that are transpiring. Ideally, you have taken the time to make sure that after dark, no one is in your building to start with. Now, so you don't have to evacuate. And if you know of dangerous events that could transpire, you have taken the measures to inform your people and prevent access to, make sure that there's no one to evacuate to. So if you're finding a position where you have to evacuate during civil unrest, I think to extent your plan already failed. But with that said, if you are there, this is where the contingency thinking comes in when it comes to alternate access, right, and alternate evacuation routes. So that's the kind of things that you need to communicate to your tenants. And so, you know that something happens right on the north side of the building, and you know that the north and west side of the building is going to be likely packed with people and protesters. You don't want to throw there, right? You don't want to have your tenants and your employees exiting the main doors facing the rioters now, and that's going to be a problem. So this is where you want to direct them to the east side, the south side of the building for emergency exit, and they can get away from there. But that is the kind of thing that is not going to happen without situational awareness. That's not going to happen without pre-planning. So that's why it's so critical to have those plans now. And ultimately, you really should not be in a position that you need to evacuate anyone during civil unrest. I hope that answers it.
It does. I think it's a really important thing. I've heard a lot of groups talk about evacuating, and it's one of those things where it's important that we hear from an expert that can explain it in such a way.
Okay, I see a couple questions. For buildings with extensive glass, is there any method or product to board windows that limits permanent damage to the building, as in like holes and mullions?
Yeah, in terms of if the question is directed towards like a plywood stuff and how to install that, right? I have seen several different installation methods where you don't have to like make holes in the building. But the plywood itself, I have seen this being it's a special material that's been glued into, and it's very strong. And so, it's you glue it in, and then you can remove it with a special kind of tool, and there's some cleanup required after you remove it. But I have seen some glue-like material that's being used here on some buildings to cover the plywood if you just cannot afford putting holes in the walls and stuff like that, which I totally understand. And that's also a good idea to get in touch with one of the vendors that sell also safety security film products, and see the number of options that they have. I think that could help. But yeah, there's a glue-like products. If you would like, I know a guy. I do know a company that has done some of this work here for a number of businesses. And I can simply reach out to me. You have my email there. Feel free to reach out to me. I can put you in touch with that company who I know install a number of them here on Nicollet Avenue in Minneapolis, and even by Midtown Gold Market, so they can maybe provide you with some specific product and how to do it.
Okay, I believe you touched on this. I think somebody else asked this, but I noticed a question from Joe Sparts, and he's asking, what's the most likely mistake that buildings make when it comes to the type of planning that you're talking about?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, right? It's not believing that it cannot happen to you, and kind of ignoring it, putting it in a side burner up until you have a problem. That's probably the biggest mistake, right? And two, I think the second thing, if it wasn't clear, lack of real-time information and situational awareness. That's a major mistake, where the buildings are simply preparing to respond to what happens rather than taking real step at being situationally aware of what's going to happen next week, what's going to happen tomorrow, where it's going to happen, who is there, what's transpiring right now, and making decisions in real time. Also, I suggest, right, to the extent possible, right, I haven't made it clear earlier, that for you guys to maybe establish some like an emergency manager and duty type position, someone from your managerial staff to be this emergency manager in duty who is always the first person to call, who's the person to can activate the right procedures and protocols inside your buildings. Someone should be on the clock all the time during those potentially very challenging times ahead of us. So designating someone who is like an emergency manager duty would be a good idea.
Oh, okay. Okay. Yep. Just got clarification. So Joe, he was the one who asked that question earlier. It also popped up in my chat. So thank you so much for that reiteration. I see one more here, and it's asking, do you know if the cities have a barrier plan to funnel crowds away from soft or key potential targets?
You know, that's a good question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure that they do. In fact, you know, I believe that there's kind of, you know, there's now this throughout the United States, not just Minneapolis and Paul, but you know, the police, the cities are, you know, preoccupied with trying to protect the city buildings and city assets. I personally do not know if City of St. Paul has a specific plan for the downtown St. Paul area in that regard, but I haven't heard of anything.
Okay, thank you very much.
Any more questions at all for anyone? In fact, we're just slightly over. I appreciate everybody taking the time to spend with us today. And Michael, thank you so much for your commitment to our community downtown and your willingness to share this information with us. So with that, we'll close this meeting, and thanks for joining. Have a great day.
Thank you very much. Thanks for having me here. I appreciate it.